Hi there, this is FemmeSciComm's second vlog. I post weekly on recent published research pertaining to women's health and reproductive science. I still think this is a part of science that isn't being talked about as much as I would like it to. I know there are a lot of women out there who suffer from reproductive disorders, and they want to hear about what leaps are being made in this field. For example, in today's post, I'll be talking about endometriosis. Did you know that 10% of women in reproductive age have endometriosis? And that it takes about 10 years for a woman to get diagnosed. That's a lot of time in between suffering from the pain and not knowing what's causing it. Endometriosis can also lead to infertility, and there are ovarian cancer types that are endometriosis associated. I've been researching on it for almost a decade now, both basic science and cohort studies. The first endometriosis paper I'll be discussing was recently published in PNAS, Role of Thyroid Dysimmunity and Thyroid Hormones in Endometriosis. First author is Peyneau, and senior author is Batteux, both from the Paris Descartes University. So let's get into it. This study aims to determine if there is a link between thyroid disorders and endometriosis. I've already talked a little bit about endometriosis, a reproductive disorder that causes lots of pain and possibly infertility in about 10% of women in reproductive age. That is, between the ages of a woman's first period and last period. Let's say on average 13 to 51 years old. This disorder is characterized by the presence of endometrial tissue outside of the uterine cavity. But what constitutes a thyroid disorder? Thyroid disorders usually occur when the thyroid, the butterfly-shaped gland at the base of the neck, produces too much or too little hormones, which include TSH, T3, and T4. In hyperthyroidism, the thyroid gland is overactive. In hypothyroidism, the thyroid gland is unable to produce enough hormones. Causes of these disorders include Graves' disease, Hashimoto's disease, goiters, and thyroid nodules. Most of the causes that I've mentioned are immune-related. For example, in Graves' disease, there are antibodies made by the immune system that stimulate overproduction of thyroid hormones. This disease is known to be hereditary and may develop at any age in men or women, but it's more common in women ages 20 to 30. Another example, in Hashimoto's disease, the body's immune cells attack cells in the thyroid gland. It is known that this is primarily a disease of women, with a sex ratio of approximately 7:1. So at first, I was a little confused about the relationship between endometriosis and thyroid disorders. However, I realized that endometriosis is frequently associated with organ-specific autoimmune diseases. So this research group wants to investigate this connection by first looking at the different endometrial cells and determining if there are any RNA transcripts or proteins related to thyroid signaling being differentially produced. The different endometrial cells can be found utopically, which means inside of the uterus, or ectopically, which means outside of the uterus. Second, they have 3 different mouse models to test the relationship between endometriosis and thyroid dysfunction. These 3 mouse models are toxic thyroiditis, autoimmune thyroiditis, and HTG immunization. Thirdly, they have data on a cohort of patients, some with endometriosis and some with endometriosis and thyroid dysfunction. Using this data, they check to see if any factors correlate with one another. But first things first, for the results. In their in vitro studies, they find that certain thyroid signaling-related transcripts, or RNA, and protein are produced in different amounts compared to endometriosis-free cells. Transcripts include TSHR, THR-A2, DIO2, and MCT8. Proteins that are differentially produced include TSHR, THR-A2, and DIO2. TSHR is a thyroid-stimulating hormone receptor. THR-A2 is a smaller TSHR. and DIO2 is an enzyme in thyroid signaling. Then they move on to find out what happens to these cells when treated with the different thyroid hormones. When the cells are treated with TSH, they find that cell proliferation is increased in all cell types, including cells without endometriosis. For ROS production, however, only stromal cells from women with endometriosis show an increase in ROS production with TSH treatment. When the cells are treated with T3, epithelial endometriotic cells proliferate more than cells found inside of the uterus, whether the patient has endometriosis or not. Similarly, when the cells are treated with T4, epithelial ectopic cells proliferate more than any eutopic cells, and for ROS production, only stromal cells from women with endometriosis have an increase in ROS production. Moving on to the mouse studies, they find that mice with hypothyroidism and euthyroidism develop smaller and less heavy endometriotic lesions. Mice with autoimmune thyroiditis develop larger and heavier endometriotic lesions. Finally, through medical chart categorization of 571 patients, they find that there is not a higher prevalence of thyroid disorders in endometriosis patients, nor is there a higher prevalence of endometriosis in patients with thyroid dysfunction. They do find that endometriosis patients with thyroid dysfunction display significantly more chronic pelvic pain than endometriosis patients without thyroid dysfunction. So what does this all mean? This study does not pinpoint a direct link between endometriosis and thyroid dysfunction. This study finds that some thyroid-associated RNA and protein may be dysregulated in cells of endometriosis. However, this does not test causality of endometriosis to thyroid dysfunction or vice versa. Also, the thyroid hormones TSH, T3, and T4 may affect cell proliferation and ROS production in stromal endometriotic cells, but this is difficult to identify if this happens in physiological conditions, i.e. in the human body of a woman with endometriosis. Lastly, just because they don't find a prevalence of thyroid dysfunction and endometriosis, and vice versa, in their cohort of 571 patients does not mean there is none. It may be interesting to look at a larger cohort of data. It is intriguing that they find in patients with endometriosis and thyroid dysfunction that there's a higher prevalence of chronic pelvic pain. A study on pain receptors and thyroid-related proteins and hormones may be the next step given this data. Thank you for reading, listening, and watching my assessment of this paper. Keep informed, stay interested, and keep doing great women's health research. Bye! Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're interested in this content, please make sure to subscribe to my page. I'll be posting weekly videos pertaining to current research studies in women's health and reproductive medicine. You can also check out my website, FemmeSciComm.com, and you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest at FemmeSciComm. Thank you.